In the history of this nation, every 10 minutes, a black person is reported missing. But to the justice system, that 10 minutes often becomes 10 years of silence and neglect. That is the Black Truths. Welcome to Black Mystery. Today, we descend into a chilling story that should never have been forgotten. The Silent Harvest, the vanishing on the still fields of Harmony Creek, Mississippi. Harmony Creek, a town whose name is a cruel lie. Deep in the Mississippi Delta, this land is haunted by the ghosts of old plantations, still holding sway. The population is predominantly black, trapped in desperate poverty, locked in a systemic cycle of obsolete economic structure. But the poverty is not the worst part. The horror is the silence. Over the last 3 years, 5 black individuals have vanished without a trace here. No Amber Alerts, no massive search parties, no national media outrage, just the silence of the system. Our central case begins one August morning in 2024, when Elijah Eli Hayes, a 19-year-old college freshman, dreaming of becoming a teacher, suddenly disappeared. Eli was his family's hope, the first in his lineage with a chance to break free from the cycle of Harmony Creek. He vanished near the barrens, the vast abandoned cotton fields, where his ancestors had spilled their sweat, blood, and tears. Eli's disappearance was not an isolated incident. It was a terrifying link in a gruesome chain. Local police, led by Deputy Sheriff Quentin Thorne, quickly closed the file. He likely left to find a better life, or got involved with drugs. A hollow verdict, a painful dismissal, repeated for decades. The first dark truth we must confront is this: for some people, a disappearance is a tragedy. For black people, a disappearance is often just a forgotten statistic. And in that silence, a terrifying black truth waits to be unearthed. To understand the horror of Harmony Creek, we must look beyond Eli Hayes. We must look at the ghosts that preceded him. For 3 years, the same pattern played out, the same dismissive shrug from local law enforcement. 5 black lives erased, 5 families left to scream into the void of the Delta night. Let us name them. Let us remember their struggle. First was Tamara Johnson, 25 years old, a community activist, relentlessly organizing voter registration drives. She was a threat to the old guard, demanding a voice for her people. Vanished in 2021. Then came Marcus Dean, 40 years old, a former plant worker who filed a massive environmental lawsuit against a local official. He fought for the health of his community. Vanished in 2022. Third was Jasmine Porter, just 17, a high school student who disappeared immediately after lodging a complaint of abuse against a powerful local figure. She dared to speak up. Vanished in 2023. And now, Eli Hayes, the bright young college freshman, the one who was supposed to escape. When you analyze these 5 victims, they were not criminals. They were not simply runaways. They were all black individuals with one common denominator: ambition, potential, the courage to challenge the status quo. They were the seeds of change, growing in a soil determined to keep them barren. Let's focus on the night Eli disappeared. He was walking home from the public library, cutting across the edge of the barrens. The only witness, an elderly neighbor, reported hearing the screech of tires stopping abruptly, followed by a single choked-off scream, swallowed instantly by the vast oppressive silence of the fields. She called 911. The police arrived. No car, no Eli. Only one piece of evidence remained: a new pair of Nike shoes, one resting on the ground, stained with a distinct streak of red Delta dirt. Deputy Sheriff Thorne arrived on the scene himself. He looked at the shoe and told the frantic neighbor he probably got lost in the dark or got picked up by a drug crew from out of state. Don't worry. A dismissive, cold response. But Eli's family knew the truth. Eli didn't run. Eli didn't do drugs. His vanishing felt deliberate. It felt like a punishment. But what kind of monster, or what kind of system, was handing out this punishment? When the local sheriff's department refused to even classify Eli as an endangered missing person, the painful truth became clear. They didn't care. They didn't prioritize. For them, these disappearances were just inconvenient noise. 5 black lives, 5 stories snuffed out, 5 files quickly stamped closed by the people sworn to protect them. Harmony Creek was harvesting a silent crop, but no one in power wanted to know who the reaper was. The horror is not just the crime. It is the calculated indifference. That calculated indifference is what creates the perfect hunting ground. 2 weeks passed. Eli Hayes' disappearance earned a small 4-paragraph article in the local Gazette, and that was it. Eli's mother, broken by silence, desperately called the FBI. She was denied. The reason given: insufficient evidence of federal crime. This is the moment we must analyze the agonizing black truths of racial profiling. Within the investigative system, when a white person vanishes in suburbia, the system sounds the full alarm. Police, FBI, media frenzy, and massive search funds. When a black person vanishes in a struggling community, the default assumption is risky lifestyle, gang involvement, or homelessness. This disparity is not mere negligence. It is a systematic coding, a prejudgment built into the very DNA of law enforcement that dictates whose life holds value and whose is disposable. The Harmony Creek Sheriff's Department reflected this brutal reality perfectly. Deputy Sheriff Quentin Thorne remained the sole investigator. His official progress report offered vague, dismissive theories. Eli may have followed Tamara Johnson, the first missing victim. This is likely an external drug turf war. The facts, however, told a different story. We know from police call logs that the initial search for Eli dedicated a meager 4 hours to scour the barrens, an area spanning hundreds of acres, a deliberate, inadequate effort, and the single piece of physical evidence that Nike's shoe stained with red dirt was mysteriously misplaced or officially logged as non-applicable in the police evidence room. The investigation was not stagnant, it was sabotaged. This level of incompetence forces us to ask, is Thorne merely an inept officer, or is there something far more sinister at play? Is the killer a faceless monster, or is the killer a black ghost in the machine? A protector of the law, who is secretly the author of the crimes. Let's look closer at Thorne. He maintained an unnervingly composed demeanor throughout the entire ordeal. He is the local gatekeeper, born and raised in Harmony Creek, the son of a family with deep, dark history tied to the old plantations. He understands exactly how this system works. He controls the flow of information. He controls the narrative. He is the guardian, ensuring the old order remains undisturbed. He never showed signs of panic or frustration. He simply went through the motions, enough to satisfy a superficial inquiry, but not enough to ever find a body. This suggests a calculated confidence, the assurance that his victim's silence would be permanent. The fundamental truth is, the system failed Eli and the others long before they disappeared. This institutional failure is part of the black truths we confront every day. It created a void, a justice black hole. And the desperate craving for a real, righteous hand of justice is now boiling over in the community. The empty fields of Harmony Creek are not just empty of bodies, they are empty of accountability. When the government and the mainstream media turn their backs, justice must find its own way in. 20 days into Eli's disappearance, a sleek black SUV, bearing no external markings, rolled into Harmony Creek from Atlanta. This was the Onyx Collective. The Onyx Collective is not a police force. They are a non-profit to private investigative unit, comprised entirely of black professionals, former cold case detectives, data analysts, and forensic scientists. They specialize in resolving the cold and forgotten cases, the ones the system deems unworthy of precious resources. This is self-reliance in action. This is the black grace stories we desperately need. Leading the charge is Detective Maya Vance, 35 years old, sharp, unyielding, and carrying a professional scar that fuels her fire. Vance was once an elite detective in the Atlanta PD. Her career was destroyed after she blew the whistle on her superiors for systemic racism stories in cases prioritization. Now, she brings her formidable experience and personal outrage to bear against the very system that created the problem. Vance and her team bypassed the sheriff's department entirely. They started where justice should always start, by listening to the people the police ignored. She met with Eli's mother. The raw pain was palpable. "My son was good. He did not run away. The police never even tried to look." She spoke with the elderly neighbor. "I told Deputy Thorne about the car and the scream. He told me I must have been confused." Vance's assessment was immediate and damning. This was not mere incompetence. This was deliberate concealment. She requested the case files from Thorne, initiating the first formal confrontation. Deputy Sheriff Thorne, contemptuous tone. "This is a local matter, Ms. Vance. I don't believe a private organization from Atlanta can possibly understand the statutes and the specific issues of this region." Vance, eyes locked on Thorne, voice cold and steady. "We understand the statutes perfectly, and we understand the specific issues far better than you do, Deputy. I only require the files. Refuse, and I will contact the state senator regarding local law enforcement obstruction of justice." Thorne, caught between his arrogance and the threat of political exposure, reluctantly handed over a thin, half-empty file. Vance isn't just investigating the disappearance of Eli Hayes. She is reinvestigating the system that destroyed her career and plunged people like Eli into perpetual darkness. She is the embodiment of the audience's deep desire for agency, intelligence, resilience, and the self-determination to seize justice where it has been denied. She is the corrective agent, the one who will judge the system. The Onyx Collective set up their command center in the abandoned community center, bringing with them a torrent of technology and meticulous methodology. Their presence alone was a challenge to the old established order of Harmony Creek. They were a visible, undeniable statement. Our lives matter. And if the system won't fight for us, we will fight for ourselves. The arrival of the Onyx Collective was the sound of the cavalry finally coming home. For the first time, the story of the missing would be investigated and ultimately told by those who truly understood the black truths. The Onyx Collective does not waste time on fruitless paper trails. They go straight to the source. They go back to the Barrens. Using state-of-the-art drones and sophisticated thermal imaging technology, they discovered what the local police had deliberately overlooked an anomaly beneath the dry, overgrown grass near the location of the reported scream. Detective Vance's team carefully excavated the spot, and there, buried barely beneath the topsoil, were the first real clues. They found a single blood-stained thread of cotton, not modern synthetic fiber, but coarse, old-style cotton fiber. Beside it lay an oxidized Lincoln penny coin, minted decades ago. Small, almost meaningless items. But to Vance, they were screaming secrets. The 5 victims were finally beginning to connect. Vance immediately cross-referenced the physical evidence with the victims' profiles. Marcus Dean was the only person in Harmony Creek who had worked at a now-shuttered textile mill, dealing with bales of rough cotton fiber. Jasmine Porter was known to always carry an old sentimental purse gifted by her grandmother, which contained a handful of similar antique coins. And Eli's missing shoe. Vance's forensic analyst confirmed the mark on the remaining shoe was not caused by friction or rock, but a sharp, clean cut, the kind made by a shearing tool or a cotton hook, not a typical weapon. Analysis. These were not random acts of violence. This was meticulous targeting. The killer was not interested in addicts or runaways. They were interested in people who had tried to escape. Eli, who had tried to reform Tamara, or who had actively pushed back Marcus Jasmine against the entrenched social order of Harmony Creek. The killer was an architect of control. But the horror runs deeper than the killer's motive. It lies in the social pressure that enabled the crimes. The killer operated with absolute confidence that these victims would not be missed, or if they were, their disappearances would be dismissed as predictable casualties of their economic and social circumstances. Think about the conditions Vance had to overcome. The victims' families had limited financial resources to hire lawyers or private investigators. They had no reliable voice in the mainstream media. Crucially, they had a deeply ingrained historical mistrust of the very law enforcement tasked with protecting them. This social pressure is the killer's true weapon. It silences witnesses, it stifles leads, it ensures that the system itself becomes complicit through inaction. The blood-stained cotton thread was not just physical evidence, it was a metaphorical rope, tying these innocent lives back to the painful history of exploitation and forced labor on that delta soil. It was a terrifying reminder that the past is never truly dead in America. Sometimes it wears a badge. The investigation was no longer about 5 missing persons. It was about confronting the socioeconomic and racial infrastructure that actively protected the person responsible for the silent harvest. The seeds of the victim's fate had been sown long ago, in the very ground where they vanished. And Detective Vance knew the next logical step had to be to look not at the forgotten victims, but at the arrogant hands that refused to search for them. The pressure from the Onyx Collective was immense. Detective Vance's strategic, data-driven approach forced the local sheriff's department to publicly resume the investigation. Deputy Sheriff Thorne, now under reluctant scrutiny, quickly offered a scapegoat. He announced a primary suspect, a local white man with a history of drug addiction and petty theft named Billy Joe. Thorne, on local TV, dismissive. "We believe Billy Joe robbed them for drug money and may have killed them to cover his tracks. This is an isolated incident tied to substance abuse." But Maya Vance was not deterred by convenient narratives. She knew this was a textbook case of racial profiling and deflection. Billy Joe had no history of organized violence, nor the meticulous planning required to dispose of 5 bodies over 3 years while manipulating police records. Vance shifted her entire focus to the man who controlled the investigation's failures, Deputy Sheriff Quentin Thorne. Thorne carried the weight of Harmony Creek's history in his name and his mannerisms. His family was one of the largest landowning plantation families in the region's brutal past. He represented the entrenched power structure that had historically profited from the subjugation of black lives. He was, literally and figuratively, a shadow of the old guard. Vance found his composure, his unwavering calm, amidst 5 missing person cases, to be not reassuring, but psychopathic. She began to overlay Thorne's personal history with the case files he had overseen. The connection was chilling. First, there was the missing evidence, the blood-stained shoe, which Thorne himself had handled and logged as non-applicable. Second, every single missing person report, Eli, Tamara, Marcus, Jasmine, had been flagged with an identical obscure error code in the police database. An error code generated exclusively by Thorne's personal computer. The core suspicion was this: the deliberate stagnation of the police investigation was not a result of incompetence. It was a consequence of calculated systemic malice, fueled by Thorne's deep-seated racism. He wasn't solving the crimes, he was managing them. Thorne operated under the belief that he had a sacred duty to preserve the natural order of Harmony Creek. In his twisted view, people like Eli Hayes, young, educated, and striving, or Tamara Johnson, a politically active organizer, were existential threats to that order. His badge was his shield, and his position as deputy sheriff was his license to enforce an archaic, cruel code. Vance understood that proving this was the real battle. Thorne was insulated by his uniform, his family name, and the very system that promoted him. To accuse him was not just to accuse a killer, but to confront the foundational racism story, woven into the fabric of the county's governance. If the suspect was a powerful, respected figure who held authority, the burden of proof required by the justice system was multiplied tenfold. The fear was that the local judiciary, influenced by figures like Thorne, would never allow the necessary warrants. The case would be permanently stalled. Another tragic statistic filed under Black struggles. Vance knew they needed more than circumstantial evidence and manipulated records. They needed something undeniable, something forensic, something that could scream the pata of black truths from the very fields Thorne believed he owned. They needed to bypass the local institutions and find the evidence that would take Thorne down in an undeniable, devastating public spectacle. The battle for justice now depended on the power of data over the power of the badge. Detective Vance knew they could not defeat Thorne by playing by his rules. They had to attack his blind spot. They had to attack his perceived impenetrable defense. The data. Thorne was arrogant. He believed his authority, his uniform, and the pervasive systemic silence would protect him. He never considered that a group like the Onyx Collective, black investigators leveraging digital expertise, would be capable of exploiting the very tools he used to enforce his brutal regime. Vance and her data analyst devised a sophisticated plan. They knew physical warrants would be denied by the local courts, so they relied on covert forensic analysis. Their target, the GPS tracking system of Thorne's official patrol vehicle. The Onyx team managed to remotely access and restore the historical GPS logs from Thorne's police cruiser. What they uncovered was not random. It was a terrifyingly precise pattern, a map of murder. They plotted Thorne's movements during the precise time window of each of the 5 disappearances: Eli Hayes, Tamara Johnson, Marcus Dean, and the others. The patrol car's route was meticulously inconsistent with his official duty logs of routine patrol. Instead, during those critical hours, the vehicle always converged on a single secret location, an old, dilapidated storage shed deep within the barrens, far from any main road or documented route. On the night Eli Hayes vanished, the GPS log showed Thorne's vehicle stopping at that shed, staying put for a continuous 4 hours before returning to the station for his shift change. The pattern was identical for all 5 victims. This was the smoking gun. This was the undeniable digital proof of a serial killer operating with a badge. Vance, this is the black truths laid bare. The system not only allowed him to operate, but it provided him with the perfect alibi and the necessary mobility. He wasn't just committing murder. He was using his police authority to systematically eliminate black citizens he deemed a threat to his warped sense of order. His first act of violence against these victims was filing their reports under runaway, a cover-up encoded in the public system itself. With the evidence of location and time now secured, a digital chain linking Thorne to every victim, Vance and the collective understood their next move. They could not trust the information to the local SBI, fearing leaks or political interference. They had to secure the crime scene first. They had to confirm what was inside that shed. Vance mobilized her team for a rapid, unauthorized reconnaissance mission to the barrens. They moved under the cloak of deep night, relying only on their training and the certainty that they were the only ones who truly cared about the fate of the silent harvest victims. The risks were extraordinary. They were breaking protocol, acting without official legal backing, and directly challenging a killer who wore a uniform and carried a gun. But the knowledge they carried, the knowledge of the truth long denied to the community, was a powerful motivator. They had drawn the map to the truth, and that map, drawn not in ink but in GPS coordinates, led them directly into the dark heart of Harmony Creek's history. The time for whispering was over. The time for exposure was imminent. Before we enter that shed, before we confront the gruesome evidence, we must analyze the terrifying mechanism that drove Deputy Sheriff Quentin Thorne. Thorne was not a random psychopath. He was a terrifying product of the systemic white supremacy deeply embedded in this region's history. His motive was chillingly simple: to preserve the old social order. Thorne believed Harmony Creek could only maintain its harmony if the black community remained in the position of economic and social subservience his ancestors had brutally defined. Eli, the college student, Tamara, the political activist, Marcus, the whistleblower, Jasmine, the young complainant. They were not individuals to Thorne. They were anomalies. They were threats to his sacred, warped legacy. To him, these acts were not crimes. They were a duty, a necessity to safeguard the hierarchy. This was his psychological sickness, a delusion of authorized brutality. He saw himself as the quiet reaper, the one who silently culled the bad seeds before they could grow and challenged the status quo. His badge was a divine right to commit atrocity. Now, the chilling crescendo. Under the cover of darkness, the Onyx Collective, Vance, and 2 forensic specialists breached the old storage shed in the barrens. The air inside was thick, cold, and heavy with a metallic, sickening odor. What they found was not just a crime scene. It was a horrifying gallery of historical torment. They found 5 bodies, meticulously stored in large, sealed plastic containers, laid out on a thin layer of dark delta soil. Thorne had treated them not as human remains, but as disposable commodities. The bodies had been subjected to unspeakable, calculated brutality. The analysis indicated the victims were tortured, not for information, but to systematically break their spirit and extinguish their hope. Before death, Eli Hayes' body was in the final container. His hands showed severe, jagged lacerations, evidence that he had frantically clawed at the containers, or perhaps attempted to scratch a message, a final testament, into the walls of his horrifying prison. Most chillingly, Thorne had used agricultural implements, blunt tools, sharp hooks, and rough shears, the tools of the cotton field, to commit and dispose of his crimes. This was not the work of a police officer's standard-issue weapon. This was the work of a man reaching back into the violent legacy of the Delta to inflict his punishment. The method itself was an extension of the historical black struggle. The shed floor had been scraped clean, but the forensic evidence confirmed that Thorne spent hours here, meticulously carrying out the dismemberment and disposal, ensuring the remains would never be easily identifiable or tied to a central location, a chilling testament to his patience and lack of remorse. Thorne, the deputy sheriff, was fully aware of the police procedures and forensic limitations. He banked on the certainty that no one would dedicate the resources, the time, or the technology to look for these 5 black lives. He relied on the system's failure to secure his freedom, but he never counted on Maya Vance. He never counted on the Onyx Collective. He never counted on black individuals seizing the power to demand accountability for their own. He did not kill them with a standard-issue gun or knife. He killed them with the brutal, symbolic tools of the cotton field, the tools of exploitation. This shocking reality elevated the crime from simple serial murder to a profound, sickening act of political and racial terrorism. The time for justice was not coming from the halls of power. It was rising from the very dirt of the barrens. With the horrific evidence secured, photographic and forensic proof of the 5 remains inside the shed, Detective Vance wasted no time. She bypassed the compromised local authority entirely. Vance delivered the package of evidence, the GPS logs, the shed photos, and the forensic analysis, directly to the State Bureau of Investigation, SBI, in the state capital. She presented an unassailable case, emphasizing that the crime was committed and concealed under the protection of a police badge. The state authorities, facing undeniable proof and the imminent threat of a massive public scandal, were forced to act immediately. The arrest of Quentin Thorne was not left to chance. The next morning, Thorne was not apprehended at the sheriff's department. He was caught right where he belonged, in the barrens, standing beside the shed, attempting to bury yet another container. The SBI agents, operating under strict, Vance-mandated protocols, surrounded Thorne. He was isolated, his badge and his authority suddenly stripped of all power. He did not resist. His face held no remorse, only a profound, arrogant astonishment at his own exposure. He had underestimated the resolve of the community he sought to control. Thorne, a low, shaking voice. "You don't understand. I was maintaining order. These people, they would have destroyed everything." Vance, stepping forward, standing tall against the grim backdrop of the fields, her voice ringing with clarity. "You didn't maintain order, Thorne. You perpetuated cruelty. You are the brutal remnant of a savage legacy. And this black mystery ends here. You are under arrest for murder, abuse of authority, and the systematic concealment of a horrifying racial terrorism." Thorne was immediately extradited from Harmony Creek, his public humiliation serving as a seismic shockwave through the region. The sheriff's department chief was suspended. The systematic failure of local law enforcement was violently exposed. The reaction from the community was immediate and overwhelming. Families poured into the streets. The initial grief quickly transformed into explosive, righteous anger. Anger directed not just at Thorne, but at the decades of neglect he represented. Maya Vance, standing alongside the grieving families, delivered the powerful indictment the audience needed to hear. Vance, in a tone of measured, unyielding authority. The justice we find today is not simply that Thorne is behind bars. True justice is achieved when we acknowledge that the system itself equipped him, empowered him, and sheltered him for years. The silence of Harmony Creek was not consent. It was exhaustion. It was the historical weight of black struggles, forcing people into despair. We must reclaim our voice. We must become the self-regulating, vigilant Adionics collective in our own communities. Vance's words resonated far beyond the Delta. They spoke to a foundational truth. When the mechanism of justice is built upon racial hierarchy, it becomes the mechanism of the crime. Thorne's arrest was the surgical removal of a cancer, but the underlying disease of systemic bias remained. The case of the Silent Harvest cracked open the door on countless other forgotten missing persons reports across the Delta region. Law enforcement agencies were now under unprecedented pressure to reopen files long dismissed as drug-related or runaway cases. The killer was caught, but the larger war, the war against institutional apathy and racial prejudice, had only just begun. The Barrens, once a symbol of silent despair, became the ground zero for a demand for accountability. Thorne's final destination was the prison cell, but his legacy was the painful, necessary conversation about the black truths, now forced upon the nation. Quentin Thorne has been indicted and faces life imprisonment. The bodies of Eli, Tamara, Marcus, Jasmine, and the other victims have been recovered, offering a crucial measure of closure to their devastated families. But the story of the Silent Harvest is not a story of a happy ending. It is a harsh, indelible lesson in the black truths of modern America. The truth is this: the old order never simply disintegrates. It must be exposed. It must be dismantled. And most importantly, it must be defeated by those it sought to oppress. We have seen the chilling power of indifference, a power that allowed a deputy sheriff to transform into a serial racial terrorist. But we have also witnessed the transcendent power of the Onyx Collective, the power of unity, expertise, and black self-determination. The silent harvest is over, but the seeds of systemic change have been sown. We must understand that Thorne was an individual, but the void he exploited, the lack of priority, the lack of media coverage, the institutional dismissal of black life, that void is systemic. That void is the real killer. Thorne relied on the assumption that black struggles would keep the community divided, isolated, and powerless. He relied on the system's tacit agreement that 5 missing black people in the rural Delta were not worth the expense of a full investigation. But the moment Maya Vance and her team arrived, a symbol of the community organizing its own resources, Thorne's armor began to crack. His reliance on racism stories that minimized the victims failed when faced with the cold, hard facts of the Onyx analysis. Let the legacy of Eli Hayes and the other victims serve as an eternal reminder. Never accept the first explanation the system offers for our tragedies. Never stop searching for our lost loved ones. Never stop demanding justice with a fierce, unwavering intensity. The most potent weapon against systemic oppression is not rage alone, but taut, organized self-sufficiency. We, the black community, are the unbroken chain. When one of us rises up, the entire community is elevated. When one of us is silenced, the entire community must rise up and amplify the truth. Let us use this story not as an object of fear, but as a catalyst for to defiance. Let us use this truth to ignite the flame of unity and self-empowerment in every community across the nation. Our history is defined by the struggle against powerful forces that attempted to erase us. But every time we tell our story, every time we investigate our own truths, every time we demand our due, we strengthen that chain. The greatest Black truth is that silence will never protect us. Knowledge will protect us, and our collective struggle will ultimately define the future. If you want to continue to expose the hidden Black truths, if you want to be part of a movement that finds not just the answers, but seizes justice, then you must subscribe to Black Mystery. Hit that notification bell, because as long as there is silence, we will keep telling the story. Thank you for watching.